So, well, we'll start with the what happens to the registration that you have already done in European Union, and in case you have not done a registration, what does it? How can you manage it in case you want to do it now? But before I go into the EU reach, I just wanted to summarize a couple of things from the KKDIK presentation, which is very crucial because I know that a lot of you are manufacturers and exporters of chemical, and the key issue is that you need to be sure that you will do the pre-registration of your substances before the end of this year. Otherwise, there is no late registration, late pre-registration, and therefore you may miss the deadline in case you don't pre-register in time. Then you will have to go for direct registration, and which will be very difficult and complicated because obviously there will be a parallel system which will be trying to set up a dossier activity, and at the same time you will be trying to register your substance, and it will be quite costly, needless to say that. Okay. One very important thing that all these regulations, EU regulation, Turkish or the Taiwanese regulation, and as well as Korean regulation, they all have some degree of uh, uh, you know producer responsibility principle. That means that whatever you say is accepted by the regulator in your dossier. What you feed in as an information or a data in the dossier is accepted and is considered that that is your declaration and that is best to your knowledge, correct and true. Yeah. So the onus is on the producer, obviously, but then how do you check this that you are saying what you're saying is right? So there is a process of evaluation, which is the second stage after registration. So wherein the regulators are going to take a random sample and review the dossiers and see whether you have been, saying what you need. What is true, or if you've been, misinforming, or you've been not putting the information properly, you've not been updating the information. Maybe you had the correct information, but you have not been changing it, updating it, depending on the changes that are available on that. So I'll be covering that part as well, and will take you forward with other items of evaluation. So if I go to the next slide, it's frozen. Can you use this one? Yeah. Okay. So this is the overview of my presentation. Introduction to REACH. I assure you, I'll not take more than one slide just because just for the sake of definition. But what is the situation if you are not registered but you want to register? Responsibilities of a registrant, registration updates that are required, and the evaluation process and impact of on registration of the evaluation process. Yeah. So first thing is basically roles and responsibility of a registrant. So basically, just the people who may, I am sure all of you know that, but just for the sake of definition, REACH is basically registration, evaluation, and authorization of chemicals. Obviously, there was an earlier stage called pre-registration, which existed from 2008 till 2017 May, that is 1 year before the last deadline. And then this restriction is also part of the, which is there, but it's not mentioned in its abbreviation. So there is a possibility, there are chemicals that are restricted. It's important also to know that today there are 25,000 substances that have been registered, close to 25,000 substances, and we have facilitated registration of around 1,350 registrations for our clients from India as well as other parts of the world. So if you are not registered, what does it happen? So first thing you need to know that your pre-registration is no longer valid. It was valid after the 2018 deadline for some year or a year and a half, but now the pre-registration that you have is not valid. So basically the process now is that everybody who has to register, they have to submit an inquiry to ECHA. And that inquiry is basically, it's not just a form, but you need to submit a full dossier sort of inquiry dossier, which includes the substance identification. Yeah, you need to have a clear substance identification, clear fingerprinting of the substance, so that ECHA can evaluate your substance and then decide which particular lead registrant has registered that substance, and then connect you to that particular lead registrant, and then you may follow up on your registration process. Because your pre-registration is no longer valid, so you'll get a number based on the inquiry once it is successfully accepted, and that number would be used for you by you when you are submitting your registration, taking the after processing all the due requirements of lead registrant, paying him the letter of access cost, preparing your own member dossier, which is an essential part, and then submitting it through the Reach IT system. So then you will be using that token, that inquiry number that ECHA gives while submitting your dossier. So that's the process. But in some cases, you may even end up in a situation that you have submitted an inquiry, and that inquiry results in is passes successfully after reviewing from ECHA, and they may come back for certain questions. You will clarify that, and then your inquiry is successful. Once it is successful, but they may realize that there is no registrant yet on that particular substance. So maybe that substance has not yet been registered. So then you will have to prepare the entire dossier and then submit to the ECHA along with. So basically, you will be sort of the lead registrant of that particular substance in case it has not yet been registered by anyone. And in case that registration is beyond 10 tons, then basically you will also need a chemical safety report. So that is the entire process. So not registered, but yet you want to register, you can do that, and it is possible. And in case you have any such situation, please contact us. We'll let you know how to go about in that, and maybe we can provide you a more detailed Q&A on that in case you have a question or query on that. So I'll move on to the next slide. So what are the roles and responsibility post registration? So registration is an important step, but I mean, obviously it's not the end of the story. You need to keep your registration live, updated, and active. So basically that requires that you need to properly track your tonnage, first thing. So if you are registered, say up to 100 tons, then basically you need to make sure that your tonnage is in that range. So if you are exceeding 100 or you're going to exceed 100, then you need to start preparing a plan to go for a higher tonnage upgrade. And I'll come back what is the requirement for a tonnage upgrade. So say it's important to track your tonnage. It is important to know the uses of your substance. If you have a new buyer, then basically maybe he has a different type of use which you may need to update into your dossier. So that is very important to track, and very important to also because most of the European buyers who will buy the substance from a non-European company, they know that once that substance lands into their premises, it becomes their responsibility on the compliance. So in order, in case they are depending on your registration for that particular substance, then they will like to have an assurance from the only representative that your client, that means my client, only representative's client, has complied with all the registration obligations and their registration is active and alive. Yeah. So they need to get a tonnage coverage certificate or compliance certificate from the OR. Then only the buyer would go ahead with the purchasing process. But I mean, most of your buyers must be already working with you for a while, so they know the process, they know the entire exercise, and they may be dealing with us or with other ORs in a regular basis. So that is something which is very crucial. So you need to know that the buyer wouldn't place an order until unless he is assured about the compliance of a supplier, especially when there is a non-European supplier. Then another important thing is that you might have registered a substance and as a full or as an intermediate. You know that in European regulation, intermediates are having reduced data requirement. So the moment, so once you register a substance as intermediate, then you are only allowed to sell it to a buyer who is using it as an intermediate. Intermediate in simple sense means that when the substance is used in a process or a synthesis, then it loses its identity. It does not exist in the final product in the form of the original substance. So that is the intermediate definition. So in case you have intermediate registration, then you will have a reduced data requirement. But in case any of your use or partial use is for a full substance use, then you need to update your dossier to a full registration so that your buyer can continue to get that, continue to use it in another uh, type of use other than intermediate. So you need to be very careful, especially when you have registered a substance as an intermediate. So any change in uses, you need to find out whether it is valid registration or not. And accordingly, the OR will verify these details and then only issue the certificate of compliance. Then ICA's evaluation process is ongoing. Several of the chemicals are under evaluation. Then there are certain responsibilities that you need to be taking care of. So we'll be talking about it in the next few slides. And then there are also the lead registrants coming back with a lot of communications, and what do you do with them? How do you deal with them? What are your responsibilities? What are the responsibilities of OR about that? That is another detail that I'll be covering in next couple of slides. Then finally, the classification and SDS related issues. So basically, if the substance is classified, then safety data sheet is required, the extended safety data sheet is required, and it has to be in the local language where you are exporting. So in case you have only English language, say SDS or ESDS, then you need to make sure that it is available in the, say for instance, German language or French language, depending on where you are exporting. And then finally, there are obligations for new studies, which the lead may tell you or the regulator may tell you, and that you need to finalize and find out how you're going to do the new study, who is going to do it on your behalf, how are you going to share the cost, what are the cost implications, or do you have some other way to go so that you can avoid the cost of the study. And how do you avoid the cost of the study in case there may be a situation that you are not doing, I mean, you are registered for 100 tons, but probably your current business is not in the 100 tons range. So maybe you want to reduce your tonnage requirement to say 10 tons in that case, 10 and below. So then in that case, maybe you will skip some of the studies because it will not be valid or required for your registered tonnage at that stage. But that depends on if you don't have that much business. So obviously, that is something that will come up again. So tonnage upgrade. So what happens is that you keep tracking your tonnage from time to time, and in our case, we do have an online system, and it has an automatic calculation system where it identifies the tonnage, total tonnage that for which the certificates are issued, and the moment it reaches around 80%, it gives you an alert that now you are approaching the deadline, and that alert is a good system so that in case you want to upgrade your tonnage or you want to do it in such a way that, I mean, some of the exports can go on to either the buyer's account or buyer request a buyer that, okay, can you cover some of these tonnage? Then in case he agrees, then basically you can make those type of decisions. Yeah. So it's important to track it. So, and the tonnage is calculated from January to December and not from say April to March, or like we have the financial year in India. So it's very important to know that it is a tonnage calculation which is on the calendar year basis. Obviously, any change in the tonnage would result into additional data requirements. So if you are increasing the tonnage from 10 to 100 to 100 to 1000, then obviously there are new data requirements in that case. And if you have purchased an LOA for 10 to 100, then you'll have to pay the difference of the LOA to the lead registrant to be able to have that data access. Yeah. So that difference will be paid. In addition to that, there is also a difference in the ECA fees requirement, which may be have to be paid by when you are upgrading your tonnage. Finally, because I mean there may be changes in the chemical safety report in case that are applicable, or especially when you are going up from 1 to 10 to 10 to 100, then you need a CSR, because 1 to 10 there was no CSR requirement. So there may be some updates and changes required in the chemical safety report. So, but there may be a situation that you have registered a substance and your lead has registered a substance, and both of them are in the same tonnage band. So maybe say 10 to 100. Now you want to upgrade your tonnage to 100 to 1000, but then lead dossier is only 10 to 100. How do you deal in such situation? So check if the lead wants to upgrade the dossier and he has the interest, or there are other additional people who are interested in that, so that you can share the cost among yourselves so that it can be more cost effective for you. But in case there are no additional registrants actively willing to upgrade their tonnage, and the lead is not probably interested in upgrading the tonnage, then in that situation you will have to take an opt-out approach, or I mean you may have to take the do the dossier, the incremental part of the dossier by yourself. In some situation, the lead says, okay, because you're going to go for higher tonnage, why don't we transfer the lead to you? Or in some situation, they say that, okay, up to 100 tons, whatever the data requirement and all the letter of access activities will remain with me, and up to 100 and up 1000 tons, whatever the new data or new activities that you have done, you will directly charge the new registrant in case there is a new registrant of the higher tonnage band. So that is the type of scenario there, and this is quite, it's possible in several cases. We have seen such situation coming up every now and then with our clients. So new information, obviously, if there are new users, new downstream users, you need to update. Obviously, when I've already covered that part, that if you are moving from an intermediate use to full use, then obviously there are major changes, because now you will have to put in a full dossier rather than the intermediate dossier, which requires much lower data requirements, yeah, depending on your tonnage. If there are changes in the endpoints, if they are changing, if you have new study, or you are aware of a new data, then obviously the dossier needs to be updated. In most cases, this will be done by the lead registrant, but I mean, at least you should be actively participating and informing the lead registrant that, this is a new data or new information that's available. But mostly the new studies would be done in consent with, or in where the lead registrant will already be informed, so that information he will have, and then accordingly the dossier will be updated. And in case the endpoint that has been updated changes any classification and any other details, obviously CSR has to be updated. So chemical safety report automatically will require an updation. And according to that, I mean, if there are changes in the classification, then you need to be aware about it, and then you need to be also updating your safety data sheet accordingly. One important thing, that is the legal entity change. There are a lot of companies who have done the registration, then there is, but I mean, the situation of the companies do not remain static in most cases. It can result in mergers, acquisitions, demerger and other things. So how do you deal with the registration? Who owns the registration after the merger or a demerger? So that is I'll take a few slides on that now after this, and I'll give you certain examples, which is based from the ECA's guidance document, and we will try to clarify some situations there. Then obviously, buyer declare any intermediate registration. I think it's very important to be on the safe side and take a declaration from the buyer that he's only using your registration number for intermediate use only. And it's a very important thing. It is to safeguard yourself and also to avoid any confusion or miscommunication between yourself and your buyer about the nature of your registration. So this, I'll now cover a few slides on the legal entity change. How does this affects you? So I mean, legal entity change can be sometimes, I said, merger, acquisition, but also your OR transfer. If you have a only representative that you want to change, then in that case also it is a legal entity change, because a particular only representative had your account. Now that account has to have the new legal identification. So I'll cover how these different scenarios will be dealt. Obviously, there are legal entity change fee applicable from ECA, and this is, you can see it on the screen. For large, it's around 1600 euros, but for small, it's around micro enterprise, it's around 82 euros. Micro enterprises being less than 10 people working in an organization, and also there is a turnover threshold on that. So this is a case of merger. Yeah. So company A and company B, there you can see, they have registered substance X and substance Y individually, and company C acquires them, and company A and B cease to exist after that. That is the scenario. And in that case, obviously, company C, who is acquiring company A's registration, would have to pay a legal entity change for company A, as well as, because it's acquiring registration from company B, it has to also pay the legal entity change fee for company B. So company C will have 2 times legal entity change fee applicable in this particular scenario. It's also possible that both company A and B had the same substance. Yeah, rather than X and Y, they both had X substance. Then in that case, one of the company that has a larger tonnage registration would be valid, and other registration after the merger will automatically be cancelled, because one company can have only one registration for one substance. So in that case, that will be the scenario. Then second thing is absorption, that company A absorbs a company B, and then they have a new company, or the absorbed company with B. Then in that situation, again company A will have to pay the legal entity change fee for the B, acquiring the B, because then you will have to absorb the registration of company B into company A. So that will be a legal entity change, and you will have to pay one change fee in this particular case. Asset sale. So in some cases, you are not selling the company, but you are yet just selling a part of your business, or one particular product line. In that case, obviously, I've just taken an example, a typical example where there are two products that you are selling it to two different companies, and then obviously those registrations would be sold to them, company B and C in this case. So what happens is that company B and C would pay for the legal entity change, because they will be acquiring this substance or this asset from the company A. So this is a situation where you will you are not just selling the entire organization, but you are just selling a particular product line. Finally, the OR change. So if you have an OR, B, company B is appointed by company A based on an agreement, mutual agreement. Now the company A decides to move from company B, from old OR to a new OR. Yeah. So in that case, again, there would be a legal entity change, and in that particular scenario, the company C in this case, which is a new OR, will need to pay the legal entity change to ACA, which obviously has to be, because it's a decision of company A, who has to pay for it. Yeah. So it will be paid, and then it will be according to the size of company A. So if you are doing an OR change, and it does not matter what is the size of OR, it matters what is the size of company A, the company who is appointing the OR. So the legal entity change fee will be applicable according to the size of the company A in this particular case. So this was a small input on the what you call as a legal entity change. Yeah. So I'll move on to the other topic now, the compliance check. There are two types of compliances. The compliance check is part of the evaluation process with ECA, which is happening after your registration has been submitted. So there are two types of checks typically. One is the check for the completeness and correctness of your data that you have submitted in your dossier, and the second is the check for the substance. Whether the substance is allowed to be placed into the market for long term or not. Based on its hazard, property, and the type of risk it may pose. Yeah. So I'll go for the first the compliance check, which is dossier completeness and quality check. Yeah. So what is this? This is based on a typically compliance check. In this particular case is, they will review the key endpoints specifically, just to see that genotox, repeated dose, prenatal developmental, reproductive toxicity, carcinogenicity, long-term aquatic toxicity, which is typically fish and in some cases Daphnia, biodegradation studies and bioaccumulation studies. So based on these information, and if this information is not complete, or it is not properly interpreted, or there are certain gaps in this particular information, then obviously this will be coming under the compliance check, and they will demand for additional explanation or ask you for fulfilling the gaps in the dossier. Obviously, earlier this information used to only go to the lead, and then lead used to inform to the respective joint submission members. But now simultaneously ICA is sending that same information not only to the lead but also to the joint submission member. But primary responsibility remains on the lead. But we are aware of it, and then we need to push the lead, or in case he is not taking action, then we make sure that he is active about and taking necessary action on this case. So what is the completeness? How do you check the completeness? So basically, as we just heard about from the Turkey reach and also from the Taiwan regulation, depending on your tonnage, there is a different data requirement. So as you can see in the table here, for 1 to 10 there is NX7, 10 to 100 there is NX7 to 1, NX8, 100 to 1000, NX7 to 100, NX9, and 1000 and above, NX7 to NX10. So obviously there is an incremental data requirement, and depending on which tonnage the dossier is developed, is submitted, for that the data requirement is cross-checked with the available data into your dossier. Yeah. And obviously these are the FISCAM, environmental fate, ecotox, aquatic tox, and repeated exposure and cars and mutagenicity. These are the type of endpoints that are normally covered in these annexes, and based on those, they will see the sufficiency and the validity of the information and see whether this is okay or that can be further data is required, or further explanation is required, or the interpretation may need to be changed. So those type of information you get, and you get a. So what happens is basically, I'll show you first the slide, and then you take you through the process how it works in the real sense. So before we go into how what type of data and how does the lead try to fulfill the data requirement. So I think that's the first very important step to understand. So basically lead picks up the scientific literature, and in which there may be some studies which are of low quality studies, but it may have been incorporated by the lead into the dossier, and that may result into some concern by the regulator, and maybe they want you to update the study, or maybe get some more details from the literature, or otherwise go for a new study. So that would be the option. Obviously the objective of the regulator in this case is to get proper detail of the study, so that they can take the relevant decision whether it is what you call as whether it is sufficient for classification, or sufficient for taking the right decision in that case. So that type of information is very much required. So in case the low quality study is there, then the regulator will come back to that you and ask demand for the additional information. In case certain literature may provide only very partial information, that you know a little bit about that, okay, you know that this is the LD50 value, or this is the Noel value and other things, but you don't know much about the effects on different organs, or different types of cell lines, or whatever it is. So then again, obviously this may result into a requirement that dossier needs to be updated. Okay, so now obviously the each of these cases, the detailed information and sufficiency and quality of the information is key. Then you may have issues where you have a good enough information, but you don't have a data access to that. Yeah, and that also is an important thing, because at the end of the day, what you pay for in the letter of access is for the data access. So in case you don't have a proper data access, obviously that would be a problem. Yeah, some people also use prediction models, and in some cases the prediction models are accepted. In some cases, they for certain endpoints, prediction models are not accepted. They may only be used as a supplementary information. So if you're primarily depending on a prediction model, then again that's a problem, and that may result into the dossier completeness check in that case. Non-standard guidelines. Sometimes you get a good literature information on, say, maybe mutagenicity or carcinogenicity, or maybe on repeated dose study, but again they are from the time where there was no either established OECD guidelines, or they are using an old OECD guidelines. Now you have much revised, much updated guidelines, and that has more extensive data requirement, extensive observation requirements and nothing. So in those situations, again, obviously there could be a chance that even though you had the data, even though you had the relevant information, because the depth of information is limited, you may be demanding, the regulator may demand, in this case, the further information, or may demand for a fresh study. Obviously, non-standard study, again, that is what we say is that maybe, in fact, it's not non-standard study, but it's a non-standard data requirement. So maybe you need a repeated dose information on an in vivo, say, based on the in vivo study, but you may only have some information which are indicative of that, but of that effects, but they are mostly on in vitro or something like that. So that may not be accepted, but that can again be used only as a supplementary information, but that cannot be a primary information. Based on all this, there will be a data gap analysis that has to be done, by the lead. Normally he does that, and then he decides whether he's using read across, whether he's using various supplementary information, and then with prediction model and etc. other things, and then try to make a weight of evidence, try to make a justification. In some cases that is valid, that is possible, but in some cases that may not be, good enough, strong enough, and therefore uh, the regulator or the ECA in this case would demand for new studies to be done. And when you do new studies, some of the studies you can do it on your own, but the studies which are in Annex 9 and 10, they have to be through a testing proposal. So first you need to submit a testing proposal and then you go for the full study there. And if there is any existing data, obviously. So what I'm saying is, what is at the bottom of the slide is basically the completeness check or the dossier quality check is based on data quality, source of data, credibility of the source of data, data sufficiency for the classification. Do we have enough information to say that whether it is classified, not classified, or a particular class in that particular hazard class which is you're selecting? So does it clearly indicate what you want to assume about the chemical in that case? Data access rights. In cases there are contradicting data, basically that there are enough data saying that okay, there's a positive result for this particular chemical on particular gene tox, and then second, there is enough data available also saying that it's negative. And in these cases, obviously there may be requirement to do some new studies or maybe go on to some other method to identify the proper classification of the substance. Method details, sometimes the data is good enough but methods are not available. Method details are sometimes very important when you are providing standardized information for the regulator. So they may again demand that okay, maybe the data, we want you to go for a full study. The type of tables and data collected and those type of information access may be required in some cases. Specific observations, so you have a good study but you have missed out on a particular organ or a particular part or a particular type of observation in the study, and therefore the study is insufficient and you will probably have to do a fresh study on that. Or you have to do, like for instance, a study on say 5 strains, like for a mutagenicity, and then you only have a study with 3 or 4 strains, then probably you'll have to do the additional strain or you may have to do a fresh study on that case. So, and then sometimes the data interpretation may be a problem. Because you have used the right study, full proper data and information, but your interpretation is a little bit biased, then in that case obviously you will be required to update the dossier, or ECA would ask you to otherwise justify your interpretation through a higher level study. So there's a lot of issues which decides on how the dossier sort of completeness is checked and why it is checked, and in which type of situation your particular dossier can actually end up into this list of priorities for ECA to review and identify whether there are gaps or not. So the standard procedure for dossier evaluation is very, the dossier completeness check is very similar to that of the procedure. Is very similar to that of substance evaluation, but I will complete the substance evaluation first, and then we'll say how does ECA take various stages of how does the administrative part of this evaluation process works. How do you get a draft decision? What happens after your arguments, etc., etc. So I'll come back to that. So now we go to the substance evaluation. So obviously there is a fundamental difference. There we were looking into the quality of dossier. Here we are looking at the risk of the substance on human health and environment. So that is the primary difference. So the reason for evaluating a dossier is more from the point of view whether this substance is going to have major effects or not. Obviously, this can also result in a situation that when they identify the type of risk the substance may have and the type of data that you have, probably the quality of data is not sufficient to make the right decision, and that may again end up with requesting you to do additional studies. But we'll go about it. So what is the criteria for substance evaluation? Obviously, the criteria for substance evaluation is basically, the first thing is that whether the substance is persistent, bioaccumulative, or toxic. Meaning that these are persistent and bioaccumulative, typically deals with the environmental risk issues. If it is persistent, it will stay in the environment, it will not break down and continue to accumulate. Continue to build up into the concentration in whatever environment it is. And if it is bioaccumulative, then it is more going to accumulate into an organism, and that organism, if it is consumed by other higher level of animal species, then obviously there is a chance of bioaccumulation. And even though if it is persistent and bioaccumulative and including that, then it's toxic, then this is a lethal combination, and that becomes a very high priority for a substance to be reviewed and checked whether this should be allowed to be used in all situations or in certain situations or maybe needing full ban. So that type of decisions are made on that. Endocrine disruption, that is another criteria on which the substance can be picked up for evaluation. Finally, the CMR is another criteria. So CMR is mostly looking into the human health related risk issues, carcinogenicity, mutagenicity, or toxic to reproduction. So these are the criteria on which a substance can be picked up for evaluation. And based on that, I mean, obviously the second part of the criteria is what is the level of exposure and the potential of exposure. So based on the type of use, I mean, is it being used by vulnerable population? That's an important concern. Or the total volume are so high that, I mean, exposures can be too high, and therefore we need to be sure that this substance do not have any long-term effects. So all this substance evaluation procedure goes through a procedure called CORA. So it's a community rolling action plan, which currently has 382 substances which are being evaluated. This is as on 25th of August. Yeah, this is the very latest in that case. So this is the criteria on which a substance is picked up. So it doesn't mean that every substance that is being categorized or you think has been classified in some literature or in some documents as PBT would already be there in this 382. This 382 list is updated from time to time based on the internal discussion by the member states, and then depending on what are type of their priorities they have and what type of dependable, I mean, what type of say use of that substance they have in their particular country and all those things, and based on that the priorities are decided, and then every now and then there are additional substance added to this particular list. So this list keeps on growing, but there are 382 substances currently. So steps involved into dossier substance evaluation. So obviously the dossier selection and evaluation criteria, which I have already explained, needs to be fulfilled. Based on that, then obviously member states would internally discuss and then decide, okay, these are the things that we need to, I mean, add up to the CORAP list. Yeah. And then based on that internal discussion, they may come back with what you call as a proposal, result of evaluation, saying that, okay, these are the gaps in the current dossier, or maybe we need this additional information, or maybe they say that, okay, this substance can be categorized as CORAP and then may need certain authorization or may need certain restrictions. So that would be a draft decision at that stage, and that will be shared with the registrants. And registrants are given a timeline around 30 days to respond to this draft decision. Yeah. So normally, immediately the lead normally shares this concern with the joint submission members and gives his initial views and also asks them for their inputs. Based on that inputs, the lead finalizes the summary of the proposals that have been made, and that will be submitted to the ECA as a response to the draft decision. Based on that input, what we have provided, there could be certain things can be withdrawn by the from the original draft decision, or certain things may yet stay in the draft decision. And sometimes it could be that your arguments are not taken into, I mean, would not, I mean, from their evaluation, they think that your arguments are not strong enough and they do not satisfy the type of risk and hazard that they see in the particular substance, and therefore they may retain the the decision that they had initially made in the draft decision. So once the final decision is issued, then you're given a timeline to modify the substance, to add some new studies, new data, and in some cases, I mean, if it is identified as for authorization, then obviously there are major requirements. Then you have to go for an authorization application, which are limited to certain uses and those types of things. And obviously, once you get a final decision, you have a chance to appeal that decision, which you can go to the Board of Appeal, and then Board of Appeal will review both sides, ECA as well as your arguments, and then decide whether the substance, the type of substance evaluation decision that is given by the European Chemical Agency is valid or not. And depending on that, I mean, that will be implemented, and then you will take the course further. So typically, what is an outcome of a substance evaluation? Obviously, once ECA reviews and the member states review the substance, they may say, okay, it seems fine, the substance is not that risky, or risks are sufficiently managed. So that's the best case scenario, because then, you know, even after review, they may say, okay, there's nothing further to be done. There may be a proposal to add these substances into substance of very high concern. That means then now it is into the process where it is going to become more and more carefully watched and carefully evaluated from time to time, and it will be very and in case the things go further, further risk assessment is done, and maybe these substances which are in SVHC may end up into the authorization list. That's what would be the final output in that case. And then the proposal for restriction may be there as a result of the substance evaluation, and then action outside the scope of reach, which are the things, that is proposal for EU-wide occupational exposure limits. So where you are having an in-house or general public exposures, so what type of exposure limit should be there, and that may be restricted, and that would obviously have implications on your marketability of your substance. National measures, there could be certain measures that certain nations may take it, but it will not be a EU-wide sort of measure. There could be voluntary action taken by the industry to make sure that, to convince the regulator that we are trying to further manage the risk so that we minimize the risk, and therefore we try to justify the use of substance, continued use of the substance. Finally, the substance may have a proposal for harmonized classification and labeling, which again, in most cases, if it is the, could be becoming more stringent into classification, I mean, becoming more classified, more adverse effects, like, for more adverse effects, and that could be again impacting the marketability of the substance in long run. So there is another type of evaluation procedure which is going on, which is based on which is called as SME verification. Yeah. So this is another activity which most of you are involved in one way or the other, and this is a very short part of the my presentation in this case. SME verification is basically done because when you claim your company to be small, medium, micro, or large, depending on the size that you declare, your fee is charged by ECA. Your registration fee is accordingly charged. And also, I just showed you a few slides back that even the legal entity change fee depends on the size of the company. So, yeah, because your size depends on the fee depends on the size of the company. So I need to explain you what is the criteria here. Unfortunately, I hope you can read this slide. The colors are not that good. But I mean, these are the criteria. Criteria is based on the number of workers and then the turnover. So it is dependent on both the things. So if the turnover and the worker either or is exceeding this criteria, then you are on the higher level of. So if you are a micro by number of workers, but you are actually above 2 million euros as a turnover, then obviously you are small company, not a micro. Okay. Or if you were less than 2 million, but you are having 8 workers, 12 workers, then probably again you are into small, not into micro. So just for the sake of explanation. So this is applicable, and this is applicable by the European standard, and it's not applicable for how you are categorized in India or maybe in Brazil or in Argentina. It depends on how you fit into this criteria based on your balance sheet. Okay. And ECA is actively reviewing your data and information from public domain and seeing whether you are exceeding in turnover, or you have a size where somewhere you might have claimed, we have 60 employees or 70 employees, and that is being reviewed either from your website or from other public domain which carries your annual reports and other things, and they review, and then they come back and say that, okay, what you have declared is not correct and you need to upgrade the size. There is a thing that ECA normally gives you an initial possibility that you can accept in certain cases, not in all cases, that you can accept the change in size so that there is no penalty on it, but you pay the difference. Okay. But if you have wrongly declared the size and ECA has gone through the entire evaluation process, verification process, you will also have to pay the penalty, which is a sizable amount. And then also it's around 2.5 times the difference that you have to pay. Yeah. And then obviously you have to pay the difference as well. So I can give you one small example before, this is how the company size is decided. So we are talking about, in this particular case, the company in the center, that is company A, enterprise A, yeah, and it has a 25% holding in a, I mean, one of the directors who has 25% ownership of this company A also has enterprise B. Okay, so what it means is that 25% proportionate headcount would be counted into company A in addition to the headcount of company A. And the same way, the turnover of company B, 25% would be added to the company A's turnover to decide the company size. And if it also has holding in company C and B, D, the same thing would happen. The 33% proportionality will go to company A, and in the other case, 49% proportionality will go into company A. So the company size is actually not what we see as our own company size, but it also depends on the related companies that are connected to this particular company. And it doesn't matter whether that company B, C, or D are doing chemical business, or they are doing reality business, or they are doing any other business. It doesn't matter. So the size is dependent on this particular principle which I have given, and at the bottom you can see, just for the clarification, how the total size of the company is calculated. So 100% of company A, 25% of company B, 33% of company C, and 49% of company D. That would be the overall size of your enterprise in case you are related in this particular way. So this is a very key issue, and I can tell you that this has happened in the past. That, I mean, there were companies which were small chemical manufacturer, but they went into an agreement with a very large reality company, real estate builder, and when they realized that actually they ended up as a large company instead of being a small company. Yeah? So they were very small company, but actually they ended up paying the fee for the large company because of this calculation. And sometimes you may have an agreement with a very large multinational, and or the multinational may have a, say, 10-20% stake in your company, and that automatically brings that MNC's turnover as well as the headcount into your company, and that becomes a very it feels illogical, but that is what is the definition today, and that's what we are using. Yeah, and that's what is applicable when ECA is deciding on the SME. So now I go to my last slide where I give you certain take-home message. This is basically that registration is an important milestone. It's not the end of the journey. You have to maintain your registration live and active. You have to be very careful about what you are. I mean, if there are changes in the volume, if there are changes in the buyers, if there are changes in the uses, you have to be very careful, timely update and inform the OR so that he can do necessary changes and modifications. Yeah. Administrative and technical updates needs to be timely done in a way that, I mean, administrative means change of address, change of name. Name change as such does not apply legal entity change fee, because your identity of your company doesn't change. The tax number doesn't change. So then name change does not attract any legal entity fee. But I mean, I just for here, but any changes, administrative or technical, yeah, either the uses, the quantity, the nature you manufacture, the way you manufacture, and the manufacturing process has been adapted or modified. There's a change in impurity, then obviously you need to update the dossier immediately as soon as possible, and as soon as you get to know that. Follow up with closely with the CORAP list, SVHC list, authorization list, restriction substance list, because these are the things that you are, I mean, there are proposals first and then they become part of the list. So it's very important when you are, as early you get to know about your substance that is going to end up in CORAP or in SVHC or in restriction list, then you can accordingly start preparing for it. You can be aware about it, and you can also make sure that you have properly been communicating within your supply chain about this particular development, so that at least you are on the safe side and you don't end up with certain penalties, or being unaware is not an option in this regulation, because as I said right in the beginning, it is an extended producer's responsibility. This regulation is a producer responsibility. If you say that, okay, I was not aware about it, that doesn't matter. Yeah. OR communication relating to evaluation and SME needs attention and timely response, because I know that, I mean, due to COVID and other situation, when the factories were under lockdown, there were a lot of delays in communication, but we managed to convince the regulators and the authorities to get some extra time. But that was extraordinary situation, and there were extraordinary circumstances where ECA and regulators have agreed on those extensions. But now they're coming back to the normal situation. They will not be giving you those extensions. The deadlines are deadlines, and if you don't meet it, then it results into penalties and fines. So we need to make sure that we comply with the decisions, we comply with the timeline that are given. All decision, all communication from MECA comes with a timeline. You please respond it before, say, 20th of September, and then we need to make sure that you respond to us at least by 15th of September, so that I can review the details, and then I can tell you that, okay, this is gap, or this is missing, or you're not provided full response, and then so I need a couple of days to also review that and before I can submit it to the ECA. So that is why it's very important that you follow up the process of registration closely, and the process of evaluation and post-registration activity closely. Yes, you can. There are no. It is not as extensive as a registration process, which was more expensive, but the responsibilities are more extensive in the evaluation phase, and that is what is very crucial for you to know. So thank you, and in case you need any further information, please visit our website gpcgateway.com, or otherwise you have questions and queries, please come down, write to us on compliance@gpcregulatory.com. So the website is GPC Gateway, not regulatory, and the email is gpcregulatory.com.